afternoon, everyone. This video will be covering Chapter 4 of the Kirstashman textbook, Skills for Working with Organizations and Communities. The learning objectives for this chapter is to utilize a theoretical framework for an organizational context of practice, analyze, formulate, and advocate for interventions, including policy planning, capacity development, and social advocacy. Use empathy, interpersonal skills, and group skills in macro practice. Utilize effective macro practice skills, including evaluating results, fundraising, budgeting, negotiating, mediating, influencing decision makers, needs assessments, planning, and working with coalition. Also, the chapter objectives include engaging in professional roles, including initiator, negotiator, advocate, spokesperson, organizer, mediator, and consultant. So how do we define macro practice or define macro practice in general social work? Macro practice is defined in social work practice as improvements or changes that can be sought in organization or societal policies and procedures that regulate distribution of resources to clients. Improvements in client systems can include acquisition of resources when the resources are not provided as effectively or efficiently as possible. Also, macro practice involves developing new resources when clients' needs are not being met or if resources, again, aren't currently available. Sometimes it requires new policies and procedures to be developed and implemented on behalf of client systems. Also, in order to improve resources for clients, it may also be necessary to develop groups, agencies, or organizations in order to make sure needed services are provided. One key feature is that macro practice targets systems and also in making sure that clients get their rights met or they have their rights established. And it also focused on making those important changes in systems to make sure that client rights are upheld. In macro practice, we talked about targeting systems. And when we're thinking about those type of systems in which we want to target, think about federal governments, perhaps departments such as the police department. We're also looking at legislators and courts. Sometimes you're looking at social service systems, particularly related to social service delivery. Also, that could be residential or mental health facilities or specific facilities such as Veterans Administration. Other systems that we target in macro practice includes economic entities such as banks, businesses, and other organizations that support them. Macro practice oftentimes is used as advocacy, and advocacy helps us intervene in order to help clients get particularly what it is that they need. So there's a lot when you think about goes into macro practice under the generalist social work lens. When you're thinking about macro practice, you also want to consider the context in which that social work practice will occur. Oftentimes, social workers engage in policy practice within respective agencies. And this could be a potential benefit to social workers because having the backing and the support of agencies means that the social worker has the appropriate tools and equipment in order to engage in policy practice. This can include concrete items such as office space in which to work, telephone, and other sorts of technology in order to do their work. This can be iPads, this can be computers. Also, additional support services that can be offered in an agency includes administrative, clerical, or secretarial support. Oftentimes, some form of benefits such as health insurance, as well as gas mileage, and other type of reimbursement type support. Even sometimes support for conference presentations or to attend conference, which is necessary for your license renewal. Also, one of the biggest benefits of working within an agency is, of course, of having a guaranteed, regular, and consistent salary in order to work. However, in order to get these benefits, sometimes there's also other things that go along with working in an agency that makes it very challenging. Um, Even though there are a lot of benefits that you get, you also are limited and regulated often due to the policies and rules and regulations within that agency. You'll see that oftentimes the policies, the rules, and the regulation will dictate and determine how you can practice within any given agency. Sometimes it's really hard and limiting to social workers when they are trying to work within an agency, um, because usually with policies and rules and procedures, there's uh, lack of flexibility in how we practice. Oftentimes, these rules are not really put in place to make our lives or the work that we do challenging, but sometimes these type of policies and procedures are put in place in order to streamline the work, to make sure expected outcomes are met based on how that particular agency is organized and what the goals and objectives are for that particular agency. Um, there's plenty of reasons why these policies exist. Sometimes it's to keep clients as well as you as the worker protected and safe. But again, it can cause some challenges to social workers practicing in those settings. It may also seem sometimes that when you're working as a social worker in settings that a lot of the policies and the rules are primarily to serve the agency's interests, and that may be so. But even as social workers employed by these agencies, we still have to make sure that we are abiding by these policies. Part of our ethical duties and responsibilities include to the agencies as well as to the profession in which we work, which oftentimes have rules of operation and policies that we must follow. There are often times where the professional and the organizational policies and rules and procedures conflict with one another. And oftentimes it's very difficult for social workers to navigate these conflicts, some of which can very well be ethical dilemmas. Again, our National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics um, makes sure it outlines that us as social workers um, have to make sure that we have a responsibility to our employing agencies, even as change agents within those agencies. All social workers also have an obligation to follow their policies within their respective agency, and this information can be found in our code of ethics. We also have to remember that these policies and procedures are often in place to make sure that the agency can function as smoothly as possible and as effectively as possible. In addition to the agency policies, we also have policies that we must follow in within our code of ethics that govern professional behavior. And we have to make sure that we are engaging in practice, micro as well as macro practice, that has the highest level of ethical service to clients. There are many particular situations in which professional and organizational um, policies can conflict. The textbook provides an example of a social worker wanting to be a change agent in their community and wanting to do more macro level practice in order to improve outcomes for a population or to address a particular social issue within a community. However, that community change activity may fall outside your scope and duties as an agency representative. Also, you have to realize sometimes what you do as a social worker or other activities that you may be involved with may pose a conflict of interest for the agency in which you are working with. And this is something that you just need to always be aware of and utilize supervision appropriately within your agency to make sure that you are doing your best to meet and follow the policies and procedures within the agency as well as your professional um, ethics as well. As a social worker practicing, particularly within macro environments, you need to be aware of the limitations posed and the challenges posed by policies and procedures within an organization, and to always practice on ongoing risk assessments. The book highlights the plan change process as a way to address professional and organizational conflict. As you may recall, the plan change process was discussed earlier on in the textbook. Please make sure you refer to that to review and maybe apply any type of professional organizational conflict that you have encountered as a student. See if you can walk yourself through the plan change process as a way of considering those limitations and doing a risk assessment when there are conflicts within your organization and professional interests. The textbook also talks about conceptual frameworks for organization and community change, and the three theories identified in the book include systems theory, organization theory, and community theory. System theory is employed in most, if not all, areas of social work. We talked about it earlier on in the textbook as well. Um, Whether we are specifically doing direct practice or if we're doing work with groups, family, or large entity, systems theory helps us understand how systems interact with each other and what are some of the key factors within those systems that come to play when we're trying to be change agents as generalist practice social workers. When you're thinking of organizational theory, it is concerned with how organizations function, how an organization is improved or impaired, and what are some of the factors within an organization that helps functioning be improved, or what may hinder functioning within that organization. Also, organizational theory looks at ways in which the mission of the organization can be accomplished, as well as ways in which people are motivated within an organization to meet that particular agency's goals. Um, some approaches to organizational theory focuses on management and leadership style theories and which type of managerial styles work best within what type of organizations or within which specific type of employee. Also, when you're thinking about different approaches to organizational theory, hierarchy within organizations is analyzed, as well as planning, staffing patterns, budgeting, and policies. All these are different type of approaches within organizational theory. When you're thinking about a bureaucratic organization, we usually consider bureaucratic organizations as organizations that emphasize rational decision, using rules and policies to ensure uniformity in decision making processes, assignment of work, and staff based on their specialties, as as well as a reward and sometimes a punitive system that encourages compliance with rules. A lot of the agencies in which you will be working as macro practice social workers or in generalist social workers will indeed be bureaucratic organization. In general, bureaucratic organizations are considered to be very efficient and effective mechanisms for producing goods, delivering services, and making decisions. One of the setbacks of bureaucratic system oftentimes is the rigidity, usually because you have to go through systems and heavy procedures in which to get things accomplished. That system can be considered very rigid rather than flexible in terms of options. Also, sometimes getting things accomplished may take longer because of the policies and procedures in which you need to follow in order to carry out a particular task. Usually, you'll find in bureaucratic systems that the rules are unyielding and they're pretty strict, in which it's not forgiving if you try to work with out of the set rules. And this can again be frustrated for a lot of social workers working within these agencies. Also, burnout can be attributed to rigid bureaucratic organizations. Often, another regular criticism of bureaucratic systems is that it doesn't allow for a lot of innovative thinking in terms of approaches, doesn't allow employees to be creative. Also, interest in those particular agencies can be easily viewed as very narrow. You may notice this as a student within your internship. You come in and you have a lot of bright ideas, innovative approaches to addressing client system, and you may have been responded to, whether it be in a meeting with your supervisor or in a staff meeting, with a lot of resistance to that change. Or you may have heard a lot of policies, rules, and procedures cited in terms of why that particular change may not work or cannot be utilized within that agency. And if that has happened to you, that might be a good example of how those bureaucratic systems can stifle new ideas and innovation. Now, that does not have to be the case depending on the organizational culture, but oftentimes those organizational cultures in bureaucratic systems tend to not be as favorable and forgiving of change, especially change that may be perceived within the organization as radical. Now, you as a social worker may not feel, a new social worker to the field may not feel that it's radical. But sometimes, if there's been policies and procedures in place and they've been strictly adhered to for many, many years to those employees who have been in that organization for a while, it can very well feel as if to a seasoned employee that the idea indeed is radical. Over time, a lot of organizations have really thought hard within different organizational theory and approaches how best to achieve organizational goals. There are some beliefs that by hiring employees that have certain characteristics and skills, um, that is the best in terms of improving organizational goals. Also, considering and determining whether employees have particular characteristics and traits that may not be in congruence with that particular agency also falls on some of the organizational theories. Usually, employees, organizations are looking for employees who are self-directed and motivated, who have the potential to be inherently creative, and they try to avoid employees as termed as being unmotivated, um, not able to possess critical thinking skills, potentially lazy, or at least believed to be lazy. And these are all things that are felt to have um, compromised reaching of that particular agency goals. Community theory has two primary components. When you're thinking about community theory, community is a combination of social units and systems that perform the major social functions. I'll repeat that. Community is a combination of social units and systems that perform the major social functions. The first major social function includes the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. The second function of a community is the socialization, or the process by which knowledge, values, beliefs, and behaviors are taught to members of the community. The third function is social control and encompasses the community's efforts to make sure members live within the norms of the community. Social participation is the fourth function, and it is the involvement of community members in various activities designed to enhance their sense of belongingness within that community. And the final community function is mutual support, which involves caring for sick people, the sick, helping the poor or the homeless, or marginalized, disenfranchised populations, and providing a variety of health and human services. When engaging in macro practice in bureaucratic organizations or other types of agencies, it's important to identify potential interventions, um, specifically policy planning, capacity development, and social advocacy. These are the skills needed in macro practice, and as well as some of the tools that we use to help impact change on a larger scale. When we're talking about policy planning typically uses data to identify needs and plan a solution to community or other social problems. It is often carried out by city and county planning agencies that focus on local issues such as city streets, parks, and recreational facilities. When you're thinking about capacity development involves building the competency of a group or community to undertake large scale change. It focuses on empowering a community or some segment of it to define, analyze, and intervene to improve the quality of life within that community. When you think about policy planning, sometimes it's added to other type of interventions such as capacity development or social advocacy. So these are interventions that can be used solo or in conjunction with other interventions. Again, capacity development involves building the competency of a group or a community. We also use social advocacy, with underneath it includes cause advocacy and case advocacy. Social advocacy, as we talked about earlier in the textbook, is about using pressure to bring about changes that will ultimately benefit individuals and groups experiencing social and economic injustice. The basic focus on the social advocate is the development and improvement of social conditions. Today, social workers pursue legislative agenda designed to improve client services and meet large-scale problems and large-scale programs. There are many things included within social advocacy. Advocacy can exist around specific populations and issues. You can also work in local and national elections to elect representatives that you may feel that are sympathetic representatives, meaning they understand what is going on with communities and the issues within those communities. Also, you may want to consider electing members that support new programs that target large-scale problems. Advocacy also includes networking with other groups pursuing a similar agenda. When you're thinking about cause advocacy is a term used to describe advocacy efforts by social workers on behalf of an issue of overriding importance to a group of clients. When you think of class advocacy, that's another term for cause advocacy. But you'll see that in the literature and sometimes in practice, class advocacy and cause advocacy are used interchangeably. Um, the latter term also suggests that one is advocating for all members of a particular class or group of persons. So class advocacy focuses more on the population. Cause may focus more on a particular issue, but usually it's an issue that's specifically um, impacting a particular group or a particular class. And lastly, on this slide, case advocacy um, is advocacy more in a single case focus. When we talk about a single case, we're talking about a single individual, a single family, or a small group. There are many different approaches within case advocacy, but regardless of what approach you use in terms of case advocacy, they usually share at least one common characteristic, and that is to produce a change that will benefit an identified client or group of clients. Please take the time to review your chapter more in detail and familiarize yourself more in depthly with policy planning, capacity development, and social advocacy. One of the common misconceptions about macro practice is that they do not possess, or their areas of strength is not clinical skills. But that is not what we find. We find that the same clinical skills that are necessary and a hallmark of general social work practice also exist within macro practitioners as well. They must also use empathy skills. They must also use interpersonal skills and group skills, but they're using these skills in a macro practice lens rather than a direct practice micro level lens. Um, these type of skills, interpersonal, group skills, and empathy skills, are used to advance social justice, and these group skills help improve change within an organization and a community. If you think about it, when you're trying to improve change from a macro or large systems perspective, you need to be able to woo people. They must feel comfortable to talk to you and feel that you have a genuine interest. You must also be approachable, and that person must feel some level of warmth when you're working in macro practice settings. And so those are skills that you need to be able to demonstrate. You also need to be able to learn how to develop, foster, and form relationships with people from different backgrounds, different orientations, and being able to positively reinforce others. These are also key skills in organization and community change. And that could be difficult, probably more challenging than you think, because oftentimes these people that you're trying to form a relationship with may have different views and perspective, different ideologies, different values, different beliefs as well. But you still must be able to foster relationships and maintain relationship despite these differences. Other type of skills that you need in macro practice that are similar to micro and direct and even clinical practice includes the capacity to observe others and understand them. Also, verbal and nonverbal behaviors. You must be able to observe those and understand those as well. You also have to use skills that you see often in group work and practices with individuals, which includes the ability to communicate effectively, meaning knowing how to interpret what is being conveyed to you from a communication standpoint, how to summarize what what somebody is saying to you or what a group consensus may be. You also need to be able to present yourself in a way that's confident and competent. And again, these are similar skills that you would need also in direct practice. So we can easily say that skills that help you be an effective, strong generalist practitioner on an individual level will also serve you well on a meso and macro level as well. We oftentimes utilize a lot of concepts from um, group skills in order to maximize our effectiveness in macro settings. When you think of groups, we oftentimes need to galvanize groups in macro practice in order to handle complex activities or undertake projects beyond the ability of a single person. Some of the helpful skills that you can use in group practice includes conflict resolution, which we talked in prior chapters, developing outcomes to where they're win-win or compromises, team building, public speaking, as well as consultation. And another needed skill that we use from group is coordination. Please make sure that you go back if necessary to review the key group skills. Also, within your internship, decide what are some of the group skills that you've learned from last chapter and how those skills can best help you within your field practicum. You want to make sure that you're always using effective macro practice skills when you're in different types of agencies. Evaluating results is one of those key skills. Evaluating the outcome or the results of one practice has become increasingly important. Working to improve one practice is also incumbent upon the social worker. Some of the things that we teach you to help you uh, involve yourself in reflection and self-evaluation, you'll find within your internship settings. If you notice, we make sure that we do a midterm evaluation. We also do a final evaluation of your intern, and that's a form of evaluating results and evaluating your work or your practice with individual clients within an agency. Other tools that we use to help evaluate your practice or evaluate results includes your process recording. If you're in your field class by now, you may know that you have process recordings that you need to complete, and those process recordings captures your work, your reflections within social work practice, and then your supervisor then reviews the process recording and gives you feedback. It's a way, again, another tool that we use to evaluate your work or your outcome or your results um, in the profession. We also use a bunch of different assignments within your courses in order to help you begin developing those skills of reflection. Um, in this particular course, we did the mini paper one, which is again to get you to start learning how to do that reflective work that you will transfer over to your process recordings at some point. When we're talking about practice evaluation rather than professional evaluation, practice evaluation is evaluating the effectiveness or results of what individual social workers do. It may take the form of single subject designs, task achievement scaling, client satisfaction surveys, target problem ratings, or goal attainment scale. When you have a chance and you are within your placed in your field agencies, be sure to determine what type of practice evaluation tools your agency use to evaluate how well it's doing and how well that particular agency is reaching its goals. Program evaluations is evaluating the effectiveness and results of entire programs. Program evaluation techniques might include needs assessment, process evaluation, outcome analysis, and cost-effective analysis. Fundraiser is another effective macro practice skill. Um, People fundraise for many different reasons, and they find it pretty challenging. Not all, but some. Social programs usually need fundraising in order to exist, and a lot of them can't exist without some type of financial support mechanism. When you think about the cost, and we'll talk more about that in budgeting, to run an agency, sometimes it is necessary for fundraising to occur to help support staff salary, potentially buy equipment, maybe for the rental space for that particular agency. We also know that fundraising works best when there are multiple sources of um, potential funding sources. These can include individual donors, corporate donors, foundations. You can also collect funds through membership dues and benefits or events. You oftentimes may see galas that are used to raise money, dinners, receptions, different type of um, events that are structured primarily to raise money for either an agency, an organization, or a particular cause. We talked last week, last chapter, we talked about board of directors and membership and other type of groups. But usually, when you are a member of any type of group, particularly a professional organization like the National Association of Social Workers, there are some sort of membership dues. These dues are again a form of fundraiser or what they consider donations as part of your membership. These are normally considered membership organizations as well as professional organizations because their primary source of income comes from membership dues. It also becomes critical if they are a member-driven organization because usually the size of their membership will determine how much money they can potentially make, and they need to know how or bring in a certain amount of revenue in order to exist. Also, you'll find that membership dues are ongoing. They're usually annually. It can vary depending on the agency. Um, The only caveat I would say about the membership dues is what you're finding is a lot of professional organizations are trying to move away from being known as a membership organization. Why? Because their revenue source is very risky because membership fluctuate and changes from year to year. So in years where you have large memberships, your revenue can be high. When years where your membership is low, it can be your revenues can be low. Your expenses for your organization, something again that's part of your budgeting, will remain the same or increase sometimes, regardless of your membership numbers. And so, for that reason, a lot of organizations are trying to move away from membership models. You may want to ask why would an organization do that if it's a source of income and a large source of revenue. It is because there's some theories that believe that if you remove the membership dues, you will actually get more people to join since the membership is free. Once your organization becomes very large or as large as you think it can be, you can attract money from other type of corporate donors, vendors, people trying to work with your organization. And usually they are attracted by large number organizations, meaning memberships over several thousand. I know that the National Association of Social Workers is considered one of the largest social work organizations, or is the largest social work organization that we have. They boast up into the 10,000. And so, if you think about sponsors, if you think about marketing and advertising groups, when you think about service lines in terms of products and services offered, most corporations will be attracted to the National Association of Social Workers just because of their membership. Membership implies power. Membership has strengths in terms of pushing legislation, in terms of pushing an agenda, and so forth. So again, the theory is that some organizations are thinking that they may want to remove organization fundraising via membership, and that may actually increase membership as well as increase opportunities to make more money through having a larger member base. Please understand that if you ever were to engage in fundraising as a task or plan or event, it is challenging. It oftentimes takes a lot of time and it is hard work and requires a lot of dedication. There are many ways in which you can fundraise. You can send individual letters out, mail solicitation. It's very common. Don't know if you received any solicitation from your prior university or current university. Usually, alumni will get those letters in the mail asking that you donate and give back to your uh, alma mater. That's an example of mail solicitation. Um, or you can go largely and try to solicit funds from larger corporation. And this usually requires you to develop a more sophisticated packet of information or materials to distribute to that corporate donor in order to be successful in swaying that particular corporate donor to donate to your organization. Um, Usually something that will be included in this type of packet will be a annual report demonstrating how many clients you help, to what um, how your scope of services impacts change within a given population, or how your scopes of services improves outcome. And again, your ability to evaluate or do program evaluations is key when you're thinking about improving fundraising opportunities. Social workers are in generally not necessarily interested in raising money um, for organizations unless there is a dire need in order to save an organization. But what we're finding is that more social workers need to become more skilled and versed at fundraising, especially when your program is on nonprofit. Um, and in order to know what the potential is for fundraising, you definitely need to get out there and pound the pavement and ask to see what's out there in terms of available funds for your agency or for your client. Budgeting is a key area for a lot of macro practice skills. You really need to know and understand a budget. If you're in your internship, see if that's something that could be made available to you, the budget of the organization. Now, depending on the organization, their budget information is public or available. In some organizations, it is not as easily accessible, or it's not open to the public, but find out. When we're thinking about budgeting, budgeting involves money, which is critically important to all agencies and organizations where social workers function. Budgeting is an important concept to understand. Even though most generalist practice won't necessarily be specifically engaged in budgeting, it is important for them to understand the budgeting process and how that budgeting process affects them. Usually, a budget is a statement of planned revenues, all types of incomes and expenses during a particular given time. Most budgets use a fiscal year, some use a 12-month year in terms of how they do it. Some accounting method, they use different type of accounting methods, and that's important to know as well. The most important thing about understanding a budget is understanding how much money is available, how much of it can be spent, and what it can be spent for. Sometimes it's necessary to spend more money on one particular item, such as an equipment, and sometimes less money may be available for other items, right? Um, it's important to understand how the money is being allotted within an organization, whether to services, to staff, to actual operations of the facility, and how much of it is utilized for clients. And that is very, very important. When you're thinking about a line item budget is a statement of expenditures for a designated period of time, usually a year. Program budgets list expenditures that are broken down according to program specifically. It usually should be able to tell you how the agency spends its money in addition to the amount the agency spends um, in any given program. Another name for a program budget is a functional budget. Other terms you may hear in terms of budgeting and within an agency would be a cash flow statement or a profit loss statement, which gives you a summary of the revenue that comes in an agency and the expenses that goes out of an agency. You're really able to see where a bulk of the revenue comes in, and it also provides you with opportunities on where more money is needed. You can even forecast the budget based on last year's numbers sometimes. And sometimes you need to balance the budget, and that really entails making sure what goes out of the agency in terms of expenses doesn't exceed the revenue. Also, an incremental budget is a system in which an agency's budget from last year is used as a starting point for this year's budget. Other type of skills necessary, macro skills necessary, includes negotiating, mediating, and influencing decision makers. Some of these terms we talked about in prior chapters, but just a quick review. Negotiating is a process in which at least two individuals participate in a face-to-face interaction in order to reach a mutual acceptable decision. Um, Negotiation is oftentimes called bargaining, and there could be many ways in which to do that. When you, the main way that the book outlines in terms of negotiating is separating the problem from the people involved. The second step is to direct attention to the mutual interests of both parties and not the position they are taking, right? The mutual areas of interest. This third step requires devising new options or choices that benefit both sides. Here you want to think about compromise. Also, the book reminds you that there's more than one way to come up with to um, get the same outcome, and this is our concept of equifinality. So again, when you're doing negotiations or engaging in that macro skill of negotiation, you want to always realize that the two parties may have different ways of getting to the same outcome. But what you're trying to do is decide which way is the best way, most efficient way to get the results that are desired. The book also recommends, our textbook recommends, when in negotiations, you make sure that you save the most difficult issues for last. And the rationale behind that is to utilize earlier negotiations or earlier successes in areas that are less contentious, less disagreeable, and then you build on that to hopefully have the same outcome or same success in the areas that are difficult or more challenging between two parties. Mediating is also a process used to resolve disputes between opposing parties. We talked about mediating in other chapters. We also talked about influencing decision makers a little bit in past chapters. But one of the main goals in macro practice is influencing others. Um, it is important to understand that you can influence them either directly or indirectly, and using various skills in order to influence them, some of them being negotiating and mediating skills. Other tactics: petitioning, which is the collecting of signatures on a document asking an organization or person to act in a particular manner. Petitioning can be traditional paper, pencil type of petitioning, or pen, paper type petitioning. But with the advent of a lot of technological tools, a lot of petitioning is occurring through computers and smartphones. Another way to influence decision makers through the media. Using the media can be a very effective way to bring attention to one's cause and influence decision makers. Usually, the decision to use media occurs when a group or agency decides that it is the most effective way to uh, the most effective way to galvanate and influence decision makers. Usually, there's some kind of contact with the media. Um, then a person is, I'm sorry, let me take that back. You build context within the media, have an idea of which media sources you want to go to. Next, you want to then decide who's going to actually reach out to the media. Some agencies actually have media departments that take over this function. You also need to make sure that if you are going to be the one to speak to the media, that you're authorized to do so based on your policies and procedures. Also, you want to provide ease of access for media representatives to contact you if this is the decision that is made. Um, you also want to make sure that you learn the timetable necessary for media coverage. Sometimes there are deadlines for newspapers and radio and television. You also want to make sure that you treat all media sources fairly, giving them all equal access. You also want to figure out how to handle or how best to handle mistakes with media reporting, with the key emphasis on being tactful um, in discussing those type of errors. You also want to follow up with media sources to support them and praise their efforts in getting your message out in your goal to influence decision makers. You also want to make sure you're aware that just because you met with a media source, that it may take some time for your information to get out to the public. What are some of the type of things or events that you want to share or information you want to share with the media through a media release? It could be different things. Some can be the opening of an agency. You may want to develop a media release for that. If it's a creation of a new program, you may also want to develop a media release for that. Also, a problem that may need special attention within a community may also need a press release. Please make sure you review your textbook in detail because it provides also a sample of a news release sample for your review. And you may want to practice writing a press release yourself just to get the skills and experience of doing that. The book talks about other macro practice skills, which we've covered in other sections, and such as educating, persuading, and confronting. So I won't go into too much detail here about those skills. Other skills are letter writing. Letter writing is not always recognized as a strategy for influencing decision making, but it can be effective in certain situations. It's often common to engage in letter writing campaign to elected officials um, because they frequently receive letters on topics and they will keep track of how many letters arrive on a particular subject matter. Needs assessment is another skill. A needs assessment is both a product and a process that includes a systematic gathering of data designed to identify the extent and nature of a social problem or condition, the resources available to deal with that problem, and potential obstacles and solutions to an intervention. There are a variety of ways to conduct a needs assessment. You can use key informant. The key informant approach asks especially knowledgeable individuals about the needs of a given community. You can utilize a community forum approach, which assumes that the general public also has knowledge of a community's need, and it's usually done through a series of widely advertised meetings to bring in a cross section of the population. There's also the rates under treatment approach, which counts the people who seek and receive a given service to estimate the actual need in a community. There's also the social indicator approach, which uses information in existing public records, such as a census, to estimate the actual needs for services. And there's also a community survey, which can be used to gather data about the degree and types of needs within a given community. Under the area of planning, you can always plan it with target systems or in large systems in general. Your textbooks talks about the program evaluation and review technique PERT, which is a four-step program which involves identifying major tasks or activities to be accomplished, placing them in sequential order, and determining the probable time needed for completion of each step, and identifying those responsible for completing each specific task. Lastly, working with coalitions. Many tasks associated with changing large systems require the concerted effort of more than one group. A coalition is a collection of different groups or organizations designed to work a common goal. It's not uncommon for social workers to collaborate with coalition or a coalition of colleagues and clients to pursue effective policy action. Coalitions are helpful because they allow you to combine resources of multiple groups and multiple agencies. They can be designed to be ongoing, or they may be developed to respond to a specific problem. Sometimes a coalition created to respond to a particular problem may continue infidelity as the group or individual involved recognize advantages of the new structure. So it can be a set time to start and end the coalition, but some organizations find that the coalition is so strong and effective, they continue to utilize that model moving forward to address other issues of concern. And lastly, the book talks about some of the professional roles utilized by macro practice social workers. Some of these we've talked about in past chapters, but want to highlight a couple of them. One is the initiator. The initiator is the person or persons who call attention to an issue. The negotiator, advocate, and mediator we've talked about. A spokesperson is someone authorized to speak on behalf of others. So please consider some of these, and if these roles are exist with social workers in your field, try to practice understanding what are the different roles in your internships. Organizer, mediator, consultant are also additional roles held by professional social workers in professional practice. Please see if you can consider that again within your respective field agencies. This will include our review of Chapter 4. Please make sure that you read the chapter in detail for yourself, as many of our discussion boards will synthesize the knowledge from your textbook. And you also need to be familiar with the concepts within these chapters for your quiz. Thank you. Have a good day.